Discussion. Our study provides evidence that selection has favored correlated levels of ornamental diversity across multiple signals among the birds of paradise. This pattern of positive correlation among distinct ornamental classes across evolutionary timescales and species suggests strong sexual selection on functionally integrated courtship phenotypes. The degree to which phenotypic traits are co-expressed and functionally dependent upon one another can be referred to as functional integration or interdependence. Courtship phenotypes with greater functional integration are therefore composed of ornaments that are typically expressed at similar levels and that are mutually interdependent in order to influence mate choice. Correlations among the signals that comprise the courtship phenotype also suggest a previously undescribed robustness in bird of paradise courtship phenotypes that may have played a key role in the extreme ornamental radiation exhibited by this taxon. Figure 1. Figure 4. Social and environmental variation in display microhabitat influences multiple axes of ornamental complexity in birds of paradise. Display height did not influence color richness, but did influence behavioral and acoustic richness. Specifically, species that display on the forest floor have larger behavioral repertoires than species that display in the understory and canopy. Additionally, species that display in the canopy have larger acoustic repertoires compared to ground-displaying species. Social dynamics of the display environment, measured as the proximity of other courting males, influenced color, but not behavioral or acoustic richness in the birds of paradise. Species that display in classic leks have greater color richness than species that display in exploded leks or solitarily. However, neither behavioral or acoustic richness were significantly influenced by breeding display system. Violin plots illustrate the distribution of log transformed richness scores for each species. Okay, so there's 3 sets of graph, though they are separated in terms of the x-axis between 2 sets of them, so you can consider it 3 or 6. So on the x-axis of 3 of them are ground, understory, or canopy, so the vertical height off the forest floor, and on the other 3 on the x-axis are solitary, exploded lek or lek, so how social they are, and then on the y-axis of the first 2 are color richness, and then you have behavioral richness and acoustic richness for the other 2. So you can see, like, you could say, oh, they display solitarily, how is their acoustic richness? And then you can look that up. So for example, like, if you look at color richness, the ground birds have the lowest color richness, the understory has more color richness, and the canopy has the most, but they're all like very similar, honestly. So that they're right, that didn't really change. And if you looked at color richness for the socialness, the solitary and exploded leks have the same amount of color richness, but the birds in the lake have higher color richness to show off compared to each other. And if you look at behavioral richness, you can see birds on the ground display the most behavioral richness, and the understory canopy is similar, lower. And then if you look at behavioral richness based on socialness, they're all very similar. And if you look at acoustic richness, the birds in the canopy have the greatest acoustic richness. The other 2 are similar and less. And for acoustic richness by social group, the birds in the lek have the most acoustic richness, and the other ones it's slightly less. Evolutionary biologists dating back to Mayer and even Darwin have recognized the potential evolutionary implications of functional redundancy, 2 or more structures performing the same function. Functional redundancy, including true redundancy, i.e. structurally identical components with identical functions, and degeneracy, i.e. structurally distinct components with similar functions, facilitates evolutionary innovation, i.e. increases evolvability by increasing robustness. Robust systems are those in which the overall structure and interconnectedness of parts provide protection from environmental or mutational instability such that a given function is not lost if a single component fails. Robustness increases evolvability by enabling elements to react to selection independently and diverge while maintaining original functions. All redundancy, both true redundancy and degeneracy, provides a measure of robustness, but robust systems are not necessarily redundant. Given the broad theoretical and empirical support for the idea that robustness can promote evolvability across a wide range of biological domains, we posit that the correlations among signal type within birds of paradise courtship phenotypes are at least partially responsible for the dramatic diversification and radiation of courtship signals displayed by birds of paradise. If female birds of paradise make mate choice decisions based on sensory input from the multiple signals that comprise a composite courtship phenotype, and information from those channels is correlated, then novel mutations changing the structure or form of a given ornament may occur without necessary information being lost. Consequently, over evolutionary time, we suggest it is the inherent functional overlap, redundancy, degeneracy, and structural interdependency, robustness, of courtship phenotypes that leads to increased phenotypic diversification, evolvability, in birds of paradise. Phenotypic radiations in the absence of clear ecological differentiation may arise stochastically and be heavily influenced by the specific intricacies of female choice. Birds of paradise clearly exhibit some ecological differentiation, but broadly speaking, they tend to be heavily frugivorous and predominantly polygynous. They do not, however, all display to potential mates in the same contexts or microenvironments. Some species display high in the canopy, some down on the forest floor, and others in the understory in between. Likewise, some species display in large, cacophonous leks, some species in exploded leks, in which males can hear but not see one another, and other species display solitarily. Our results suggest that these differences have shaped the specific courtship and signaling strategies of each species. Figure 4 and S1 and S2 tables. Birds with richer acoustic repertoires display high in the canopy, where there is less environmental interference, e.g. from cluttered branches, increasing the likelihood that females will be able to detect and discern numerous elaborate sounds. Likewise, more behaviorally complex birds tend to display near the forest floor where there is less light, and ability to perceive subtle variation in color, but more area available for a courtship stage or dance floor. Birds that display in true leks Birds that display in true leks have more colorful plumage, perhaps because females need to identify attractive individuals based on relatively unchanging traits, allowing them to compare among multiple displaying males simultaneously. Display site and display context thus influence the specific forms of ornamentation possessed by individual species, and taking them into account from an analytical perspective allows us to better understand patterns of signal coevolution and the potential importance of a functionally integrated courtship phenotype. Signal efficacy and information content can exert strong influence on receiver preferences, and understanding both elements is integral when examining the evolution of complex, multi-component courtship phenotypes. The influence of receiver preference is difficult to overstate, particularly in birds of paradise, for which recent work indicates that selection acting on female preferences controls the rate, extent, and phenotypic space available for ornamental radiations. Importantly, receiver preferences are influenced by the perceptual abilities and psychology of signal receivers, as well as the environments through which signals are transmitted, all of which can markedly influence signal efficacy. Additionally, the information content of multiple signals may increase the net amount of information transferred, e.g. multiple messages, or increase accuracy and reliability if multiple signals communicate the same message, e.g. redundant signals. The perceptual channels by which birds of paradise attract mates, and those channels that are correlated at a phylogenetic scale, provide tantalizing, though tentative, insights into the processes of efficient information transfer and receiver stimulation, regulating mate choice in this group. Specifically, The fact that significant positive correlations exist between acoustic and color signals, auditory, visual, and between acoustic and behavioral signals, auditory, visual, but not between color and behavioral signals, visual, aligns with psychometric literature on information and sensory input. When multiple sources of information are provided, information may be maximized if that information comes from separate channels, e.g. acoustic, visual, and lost when arriving through a single sensory channel. What exactly this information might be in birds of paradise, quality, attractiveness, motivation, etc. is not clear, but this result provides an interesting starting point for future investigations. Phylogenetic comparative investigations of animal signals hold the potential to answer important questions about the evolutionary trajectories of communication over time. However, the data used to tackle key questions of signal evolution necessarily place upper and lower bounds on the confidence and interpretations one can make from such comparative studies. It is our hope that the novel approaches we have developed to quantify color, sound, and behavior will be useful to other researchers interested in understanding signal variation at different scales. Though our primary aim was to generate methodological pipelines that facilitated comparisons among the highly divergent birds of paradise, the basic framework we describe here may also be useful for comparisons of more similar taxa, including studies of intraspecific variation in signaling effort, e.g. through sliding window analyses focused on bouts of maximal complexity or investment, e.g. by using receiver visual models to identify the number and perceptual similarity of color patches across individuals. Consequently, we feel that our approaches complement recent suggestions for incorporating a systems biology approach to the study of animal communication, wherein more comprehensive, higher resolution data will only improve the validity and interpretability of analyses incorporating fitness surfaces in communication networks. Evolutionary trade-offs, increases in trait expression linked to reductions in another, are ubiquitous. If there were no trade-offs, then selection would drive all traits correlated with fitness to limits imposed by history and design. Trade-off thinking can inform our interpretations of both the marked interspecific variation in overall signal complexity, Figure 2, and the finding that the ornaments of birds of paradise are positively correlated at phylogenetic scale, Figure 3. Firstly, interspecific variation in overall signal complexity suggests trade-offs between investment in courtship and some other unmeasured variable that differs across species, e.g. microenvironment, paternal care, resource competition, etc. Secondly, the absence of trade-offs among signal types indicates an absence of differential costs on acoustic, behavioral, and chromatic signals. Further, the correlation among ornamental classes suggests that selection is acting on functionally integrated courtship phenotypes for birds of paradise, a finding that indicates female birds of paradise make mate choice decisions incorporating holistic, multi-component information sets comprised of the various ornaments possessed by males of their species. Rather than being unique to birds of paradise, however, we suggest that this phenomenon is widespread among animals, though it is by varying degrees constrained, impeded, or obfuscated by conflicting and constraining processes and limitations imposed by ecology and natural selection. The degree to which selection has facilitated the evolution of integrated, robust courtship phenotypes may in fact serve as a proxy for the overall strength and consistency of female-driven sexual selection in any taxa, for which the integration and correlation among ornaments comprising the courtship phenotype may shed important light on the history and strength of sexual selection in that particular group.